Well, it's a fairly seamless transition into session 3, which is the what assessors are looking for in an application section. And so I'd just like to introduce John Wade from Earth Sciences. He's the Director of Graduate Studies there. Gregor Larson, who is, I think, the head of school in the archaeological research lab. No, you're not doing that anymore. Yeah.
not the head of school, just a ordinary faculty member in archaeology.
Okay, well, Gregor's been on our management committee forever and knows the way these things work and often chairs the biodiversity panel. Tim is in physics, also another management committee member, and Jess from Earth Sciences, again, very experienced on interview panels and on the DTP. So I will hand over to them. I'm sure you'll have, I think the plan for this will be each one of them will just give a little preamble about what they personally look for in an application and what makes an application weak or strong. And then open up the floor to I'm sure you'll have many questions for them. So I shall bow out at this point and over to you guys. Thank you so much.
Who wants to start?
I could start. Having done this for quite a while, what we get a whole lot of applications, and what that means is, and everybody's busy, of course. And so what that means is that we will look at them all, but what your eye starts doing is looking for the things that end up mattering the most. And what I find is those kind of things that we gravitate toward that are things that we're looking for to try and just take a note on, but also things that are, I don't want to say annoying, but just sort of distractions. And what you want to do on your application is avoid the distractions of things that you're telling us that aren't going to matter at all. So what I would do is focus on the things that, the big stuff first. What makes you different from everyone else? And tell us about your accomplishments and what makes you enthusiastic about this and why it is you think that you are best placed to do this. So if you have done something particularly amazing last summer or in school, or you have a published paper, or you're working with a really cool research data set, or any of those kinds of things, which are very much in line with what this program is about and relates very distinctly to how your experience has fired you up and gotten you really motivated to do this, and then fits very neatly within what this program does as well, which is, of course, a whole ton of stuff. I mean, it's as wide as anything. Then tell us about that. If you like rock climbing, maybe don't tell us about that. If you did other things that are relevant and important for you personally, but don't really have much relevance at all, unless you can spin that in some way as to why that matters to you and with respect to this program, then great. But otherwise, that's just more noise. And what you're trying to do is maximize the signal of all of the things that make you very well placed for this program, and show us how much experience you've got and the kinds of ways in which the life experience that you've had and the research experience that you've had make you a really good candidate for this particular DTP. So I would, you may have heard other people say things about how it's nice to put little flair about your things, but we are, it's a whole lot of applications and we're looking at everything twice. And so it kind of doubles up everything as well. So make sure that you are really emphasizing first and foremost what makes you a really good fit. And those are the things that we're going to be much more happy to see. Keep us in a good mood is what I would say. Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, we always put a lot of effort into making sure Gregor's in a good mood. It's very important. I agree with that. That's all really useful stuff. I guess so. I can talk a little bit about how we view things kind of from the physics side of things, and also just a bit more generally as well. I mean, one thing that people are always looking for is people who are really kind of keen and self-motivated, and it's obviously kind of everybody is, but it's a bit of a challenge to kind of get that right in a sense. In the one thing that I always find that people end up looking for is kind of specifics on things. Like it's really easy to say, oh, I'm really interested in climate change. I want to work on climate change and help out and so on. And that's great. A lot of us feel like that. Not necessarily about climate change, but about various things. But the things that tend to stand out are people who can kind of take it to the next level and be like a bit more specific. So like in that case, you might say, I don't understand, what the role of the ocean is in climate change. And I'd like to help work that out and kind of, maybe try and test how it's involved in the carbon cycle or something. So you're just kind of adding a few more kind of specifics where you can. I find that really helps to for people to stand out. People who are kind of clearly eager to kind of push things to the next level, right? So when it's clear that someone's answered a question and what they want to do next is then go on and work out what the next question is and where they should be going. That's often the kind of trait that that people are looking for in general. So when you're kind of looking at different areas and things, it's good to kind of put in a bit of time to go a little bit deeper, right? So you'll probably be looking at different research areas that you don't know a lot about, and as I kind of said just now, it's good to say what you don't understand, right? I think all of us, there's more that we don't understand than we do understand. One thing that really stands out often is, to be honest, is the bullshit, which I think probably not so much in graduate admissions, but I'm on the undergrad side. I'm starting to wade through UCAS forms now, and it's amazing what people put on UCAS forms, particularly in physics, right? The physics books that people have absorbed that I still don't understand as a physics professor here is incredible. So yes, no bullshit, please. People do that does get noticed in a bad way. So yeah, say what things you don't understand, what you want to find out more about, and kind of look into people's research areas and as I said, come up with kind of more specific points and questions and things. One thing I wanted to say on the physics side, so people do often look for kind of physics and maths skills if it's a really physicsy project, and that really depends a bit on the supervisor exactly how physicsy, how much maths is needed. But people are kind of looking out for that a little bit. I mean, for me personally, things like exam marks are they're useful, but they're not the key thing, to be honest. I mean, they as an undergrad doing physics or maths, you spend a lot of time doing problem sheets and things. That's really a different kind of work to what you will be doing in a research project. But it does show that people can kind of solve technical problems under pressure, which is kind of useful. So for me, exam marks have to be kind of good enough, but not, that's definitely not the end. That's not the most important thing. Often most important is what people say about research. So whether that's in your personal statement, whether that's in references that talk about research work, that's useful. That kind of thing is a bit more kind of directly relevant to the real skills we're looking for a PhD. And it's one thing there is I find it really nice when people go into a bit of depth there. So don't feel if you haven't spent every summer doing like an unpaid internship or whatever, then that doesn't matter. I don't want to see a list of things that people have done. I'd much rather people talk about a research project they've done, but go kind of more into depth about what they did, what the kind of bigger picture is, what are the weaknesses of the approach that they took, and also kind of how they kind of communicate that to a wider audience. Right, and that's probably the last thing I'll say, I guess, is that your application will be kind of read and assessed by people with quite a range of different backgrounds. So even if you've got your dream supervisor who works on X, you know, if you make your application so that only that supervisor can understand it, particularly for the DTP, that would be a problem, because it's that application is really assessed by a wide range of people. You know, so if it's, for example, if you're applying to physical climate, it would largely be physical climate people who would be assessing that, but that's quite a broad church. So that ability to kind of communicate science ideas to quite a kind of a broad audience is really useful, even at this kind of application stage. So yeah, I think that's probably those. I've probably waffled on for a long time now, so I'll stop there.
Jess, do you want to go next?
Sure. So maybe I'll take a little bit of a step back and try to think about, and I was going through things that not necessarily make an application stand out, just to hopefully get y'all to relax and think about what's the core of the application, because actually a lot of it you've done everything you need to do to apply, right? The application is just representative of what you've done. So I'd say the first thing is the academic record. It has to be good enough, and it has to be very good in the courses that are particularly relevant. Courses that aren't relevant doesn't matter so much. The other one that I'm often looking for is evidence of responsibility. So that could be doing work. That could be something like athletics if you have a really strong commitment to that, or to music or something like that. So if it's something really strong, I actually would put that in an application. And both of those are very much in context, right? So if you have caring responsibilities, if you had to work, if you've been disadvantaged in some way, so you've had to struggle, right? We want to know that because we're trying to assess what you've done in the context of all of that. Pretty much everyone is, almost all of our students coming in are going to have some sort of research experience, and that's really important because you don't want to go into this 3 or 4 year long program not knowing that you actually like research. And often we're thinking, can you have some evidence of clear contributions to that project? Often that comes through best in the reference letters, so get specific examples of what you've done. As both Gregor and Tim were talking about, interest in the project and keenness, right? Some evidence that you've really thought through. You don't necessarily know exactly what you want to do, but you have thought through, oh, this is a project I could do. This is how it would go. I would like it, right? You don't want to have that to be a surprise. You should be in touch with supervisors, thinking about what you could do, and whether or not you could actually work with that supervisor, right? Think about what you like and what you want. And in that context, I think it's also, particularly an interview, something that comes across with better students and the better candidates is self-awareness and maturity, right? Thinking about what's hard for you, what's going to be a challenge in the future, how you've gained skills over the years. That can be quite hard to write an application, but if you can, then props to you. But it will come up when you talk about future challenges. And then the last one is initiative, right? So you want to have shown that you've had some interest in the project or in the area, whether that could be reading around it, somehow evidence that you've pursued that. Maybe you've wanted to do a research project and you've sought that out yourself. It'll also come through in reference letters, right? If you've contributed to a project in a major way, taken it in a new direction, you really think deeply. So those are the things from you that I think are kind of the core of applications. John?
Cool. Yeah, no, I'd echo a lot of those points already made, actually. So my role in this is not actually I don't get involved in the admissions process, the DTP, but I do for direct entry into departments. So that is for people that have either got independent funding streams, or there is a grant available with a PhD or DPhil position on it, and I will sort of do the interviews there. So, and I will have oversight of your projects down the line. So when you transfer into the departments, I will have oversight of what's going on and progress, health and well-being, happiness, and all this down the line. So I guess from my perspective, I'd echo a lot of what Jess has said, actually, is that motivation for the project is a key one. So if that can come through in the application, because I think it's fair to say everyone has crests and dips in their sort of 4-year PhD. You know, things are not always going to go as well. You know, research is risky, so things could go wrong. So it's the motivation that carries you through. You know, the reasons for wanting to do these sorts of things really sort of carries you through. So if that can come across in the application, great. The other thing I think is worth sometimes highlighting, it's something I think Jess and Tim spoke about, is what you think the PhD or the DPhil might actually involve. So if you're expecting an experimental lab-based PhD to have lots of field work, you know, it's probably best to sort of think about how that's going to fit with your desires, what you actually want to do. And the best way of insulating yourself against those sorts of things is actually probably to make contact with the supervisor, the PI, or the possible prospective PI, and just see what the project they think the project entails and how that fits with your motivations. What else? I mean, I think if you do have a slight research experience, if you've done like a master's project or an undergraduate project, it's great to talk about that. But also is what I think we look for is the ability to sort of discuss the findings in a sort of mature way and sort of thinking about how they may apply to the actual project. And it's great to have a discussion about your research experience, your research project. Again, if you're applying for a project with fieldwork and you don't have any fieldwork experience, that's not a problem, I don't think. I think it's more, it's just more sort of understanding what that fieldwork process might require, or it could be the lab-based project that you don't have lab experience in. That's not an issue. We have many students that come into my lab that don't have lab experience, and they do fine. It's great. But it's just good to be self-aware and ask questions beforehand, and how that fits in with what you actually want to do down the line. You know, is a lab-based project going to satisfy you? And things like that. So we sometimes have people that want to do volcanology, and they come in and do volcanology in the lab. And that can be fine, but if there's a large fieldwork experience they want and they're not going to get that through the project, then you know it's probably best to find that out first. So yeah, and I think that's it. I think for me, it's the motivational side of things. You know, why do you want to do it? How does that fit in? And if on the application form you can get that excitement across, your sort of excitement to do this sort of project across. One question we might ask is, why Oxford? And it sounds a really simple question to ask. Why do you want to come and do a DPhil at Oxford? Why? But it really sort of strikes home this sort of, you know, you've maybe done a little bit of research about the department, about the prospective PIs that you might work with, about the subject, about the capabilities we have in-house. So things I would turn my nose up on an application if you just say, oh, I like the colleges, I like the dinners, and that does actually happen sometimes, and that's a bit of a sort of flag. You haven't really thought about why Oxford particularly well. But yeah, I think, as I say, I think for me it's mostly the motivational aspect. You know, why do you want to do it? Why Oxford? And why this sort of particular field? I could probably think of a few more things, but I think that'll do for now.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant, John. That made me think actually one thing, you know, you by kind of applying to this DTP, you're kind of making quite a choice in a sense. Like our DTP has quite a few kind of unique characteristics about it, and so it is really good to think about. You know, Oxford is obviously a great place and it's got a great name, but do you think about why you're applying to this particular DTP? Because that is an obvious question to think about.
Yeah, I think so. It can also sort of show you've done a little bit of research as well. You've thought about prospective supervisory teams, and you've thought about how your interests fit in with the wider sort of research themes that go on in Oxford. So I think, I mean, it's a simple question, but it's surprising how, you know, a number of people haven't really thought about it. Oh, why Oxford? Because it's the name, it's got the colleges, it's got the history, this, that, and the other. But that's not really the reason to come to Oxford and do a research project. Now, that's a kind of added benefit at best. You know, so I think that's not a bad question to ask, or at least to think about how you might fit in through the DTP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that's a general point, probably, isn't it, for all kinds of applications, whether it's for PhD applications or job applications or whatever. I mean, often, you know, often you do have to send off applications to various different things, and it's, you know, it's very easy to make a kind of a generic application letter or an expression of interest or something, and And then anything that just looks really generic, you know, given the amount of kind of correspondence and interest that people get, anything that looks too generic is generally not going to do well. So although it is, you know, it's obviously more time and effort, but kind of, you know, whenever you contact people or put in applications or whatever, or expressions of interest for anything, then the more kind of tailored they are to the particular place you're applying to or interested in, is, you know, that effort does pay off.
Yeah, no, definitely. Anyone got any more thoughts? Any questions?
I think there's one question in the Q&A. Should we move? Are we ready to move on to questions?
Yeah, because I'm sure they provoke a bit more discussion actually, if there's a question or two.
I think the question there is if the motivation to the DTP is both personal and academic, would this work in your favor or to your detriment? Should we focus more on the academic side in the application?
For me personally, both. I mean, it's the personal motivation that sees you through to the end of the DTP. It's the research motivation that, you know, might be attractive to me as an interviewer, but on a personal level, as you know, grad studies director, I think it's the personal motivation to get you through to the end. Because as I say, I think, you know, I don't want to put anyone off, but there are obviously going to be dips and troughs in your sort of research progress. Not every experiment works. There can be, well, COVID could happen, and, you know, and there can be barriers placed in your way. And I feel it's the personal motivation that really drives you through. And also the interest in the subject. And that personal motivation and the research motivation are essentially, I mean, they overlap massively. You know, if you can demonstrate that you're really interested in the research, the application of your research, the wider questions that it might ask, I look on that very fondly, I think.
That said, if the personal motivation is like somebody you know lives here, I would leave that out. That's not particularly relevant.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. No, absolutely. No, I mean, you could have some personal motivation. You could come from a country that suffers massive droughts and things like this, and you could say, well,
that that sort of thing. Sure, keep that.
You know, that sort of thing. Yeah, but I think if it was just sort of, and I've had this. You know, why do you want to come to Oxford? And somebody said, well, I like the parks. I mean, I didn't think that was a particularly good reason for sort of, you know, applying to Oxford for a DPhil.
Although I would say, I don't think it's super relevant to I wouldn't probably include it in the application process, but I say if you like the particular Oxford lifestyle, I love living in Oxford, and actually that makes me really happy, and that's a perfectly valid reason to apply somewhere. It's just not particularly relevant to the application.
Exactly. I wouldn't sort of deprecate that. You know, I mean, it's the sort of thing, you know, it's part of that decision-making process is why you want to come here. Well, it seems like a nice place. You know, you obviously want to live in a nice place, and Oxford is a nice place. But I don't think it's going to sort of, if you've got a limited number of words to put on an application, I feel it probably isn't a useful use of those words. Not quite in that way. You can say it in the interview, but it would be a sort of a side remark rather than a sort of focused reason.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. You know, you have got quite a limited number of words in your statement to kind of put across things. So you are gonna, you know, I don't know. I mean, I think a bit of personal stuff is fine if it's, as long as it is kind of real constructive motivation. But yeah, you know, it's part of your word count. So, you know, I think mostly people are going to be assessing the kind of academic motivation and things. So yeah, you want to kind of leave most of the room for that.
I mean, there's a little bit of a false dichotomy there that suggests that your academic motivation, and clearly they're tied together, but so therefore anything that is personally motivating you that isn't tied to your research, maybe don't put in. I mean, that's clearly, you know.
Yeah. No, I think that's my thoughts, and I think it echoes what you folks have said. Is you know, there's an overlap. Obviously, your personal motivation is going to drive your, you know, scientific motivation, let's say, but you know, it's the sort of bits around the edge, and I think it's the word count that's going to sort of probably make you think twice about putting lots about in, you know, that your aunt lives here or something like that. You know, I don't think that's particularly constructive in that setting.
I wonder. Yeah, sorry, go.
Go ahead, Tim.
Like, I wonder, one thing that you know, historically in academia, it was always kind of viewed that you had to kind of move every now and then in order to kind of have a healthy academic career to like to kind of meet different ideas and different communities and things like that. And obviously, you know, it is good. That's definitely good to, you know, to travel around and you know, meet different people, talk to different people. You know, if someone on their application said, you know, being honest, I have caring responsibilities in, you know, in the Oxford area. This is one motivation that I might want to, you know, I have a family, and that limits where I can, you know, where I can live and apply to. You know, I think people would take those kind of things seriously.
I would. Yeah. I mean, we are very lucky in Oxford. I think one of the big, if I was saying one of the big benefits in Oxford, I totally get, you know, the old school method was to sort of you should move around from institution to institution and meet lots of different people and then develop your science that way. But we are quite lucky in Oxford. It is very easy to collaborate with people in other departments, other divisions. You know, so I work with a guy in medicine, for instance, and somebody in biochemistry. So we are quite lucky in that. And I think, you know, that sort of requirement to move just to gain experience, we can gain experience and width at Oxford relatively easy if we put ourselves out there, if we go and meet people. So, you know, and I think you're right, is that you may have caring responsibilities that require you to stay local to Oxford. And, you know, but if you do, then do put that in. That is something that I think should be going in a sort of in a letter of some description. You know, my reasons for coming to Oxford are both research and personal. I've got these caring responsibilities or something along those lines. So, yeah.
There are like 5 or 10 more questions, so maybe we should.
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
quite a few here.
We should move on. If you're applying to both the DTP and the department, is there anything to look out for, since the same person might and probably will review both applications?
No, just put them both in.
Put them both in. Tick the box.
Yeah.
I don't know. It may have changed. I know. Oh, this caused me so much headache last year. It may have changed, but there was a box on the application form that said, "Would you if you apply to DTP, would you also like to tick a box that makes you apply directly to the department?" So there will be people, for instance, who maybe have independently funded or overseas students with the possibility of scholarship from overseas, or somebody that wants to do, say, something like, I don't know, earthquake risk hazards. And there might be a project that's funded outside the DTP by, say, STFC, Site Technology Facilities Council. And that might mean they can apply to DTP for a project there or for an area of work there, but they can also apply for this direct entry to the department. Now, I can't remember, and I'm sure Victoria will tell me differently, but last year there was a box you had to tick to say that the same application could be reused. If that's there, just make sure you tick it, and then it will come over. And then different people will review, potentially different people will review your application, so it'll be reviewed twice.
How about, are you interested in transcripts from semesters abroad or just the primary institutions?
We're not interested in them. I think that's right. I wouldn't, if you did, I mean, I did a semester abroad. If you did a semester abroad and you got grades for them and that's included in your overall transcript, then by all means include it. I don't know that I would go to great lengths to try and ensure that the other institution provided on their letterhead and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it should, you know, the semester abroad is a brilliant thing, but and certainly mention it and have it as part of it. But, you know, I don't know that you need the actual other institution to provide those numbers for you.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
How about the references? So how important will our 3 references be in determining our applications?
I mean, I don't know what sort of it's not like we percent weight everything. I mean, we get a package from everybody that includes a transcript, includes the statements, includes the letter of reference, and we take all of that and and then 2 separate people independently look at all of that, and then a third person as well when we go to a shortlisting stage, sometimes a fourth as well. So a lot of people are looking at the entire package, and I would include them all. If there's a box that needs to be ticked for the application, just make sure that the document that you submitted is the best one for it, and then we look at it as a whole thing. And clearly, what I would say is, for the letters, if you find people who know you, we write letters and read letters by the scores. I'm sure all 4 of us and everybody else too, and you can very quickly tell if somebody's written a letter for a student that they just don't know at all. And that clearly won't carry a whole lot of weight if somebody says, oh, I think they're great, but I only met them last week, right? So just find people who are familiar with your record, with your general outlook and your motivations and your enthusiasm, and get them to highlight those aspects of what it is makes you a great candidate.
I think that's especially true, actually. So if you've got a reference letter from somebody, say you did a master's project or undergraduate project, and you really, that's when your interest in the subject really took off. You may have some not so great marks in a subject that you weren't particularly interested in, but you get to your third year or your fourth year project, and your interest really takes off. If you get a letter from your supervisor, from that research project, that can really highlight the fact that actually, John really sort of shone in this. I thought it was going to be, he sort of really took over the project, took ownership of it, and really shone in it. And obviously, if something like that is quite useful to show that motivation. So we don't have to just go on the sort of the raw mark scores and things like that, which I don't always think are a good, such a great sort of on a personal level. I don't think the raw mark scores are always a great indicator of research potential.
Exactly. And we, it's important to have those documents there as just demonstration, but we do not spend our time going through every course that you've ever taken, looking to see whether you got a 68 or you got a B- or whatever it was. Like that's not our role on this. It's if it asks you for those things, you certainly submit them. But there's a question here about having an incomplete transcript and GPA. Is this transcript of interest to reviewers, and do I need to submit this in addition to my undergraduate transcript? I mean, if it's there and you have the partial one to submit, then absolutely. But if it's not, then just describe all of that. Clearly, you will have done, if you did a full year of a PhD program, you will have had research experience. And it looks like this person had to withdraw, but then you can mention that. Just the story matters a lot more than the numbers on the page. Precisely what John was saying, right? Like you don't want to expect that we are going to really cast a very fine eye over every single course you ever took. So tell us the story in those word limits. And again, those are limits, not targets. If it says 500 and you only get to 300, but you feel like you've said everything you need to say in a succinct and clear fashion, then leave it there, and we will be very happy for that. So don't think that you need to get to 499. Is there a deadline for the referees to submit the reference letter? There is, and it is on the site. Mature student reference from prior work career, absolutely. Again, people who know you, people who are aware of who you are, your character, your motivations, your enthusiasm, whatever it is you want to do. It should be reflective of you and your entire experience.
And we have a number of mature students every year. So that should not be a barrier to you applying. Don't think you've got to have this very linear, school, university. No, please don't. We really welcome people with sort of diverse backgrounds in all senses. We have mature students. We have all sorts of people coming through the door to do studentships. Even somebody that spent 30 years in industry and then has come back at the sort of they've retired early and doing a PhD DPhil. No, please do.
And
your record. So your record doesn't have to be perfect, right? So if you left a PhD program or something went wrong, right? Then even if it was your fault, right? Then we want to know why now it's going to be so much better, why this is a much better fit for you. So don't feel like, oh, just because I have one bad mark in my past or I didn't get like that thing didn't work out. You can talk about it. And if you think that it might be flagged as a potential issue, then definitely talk about it. But talk about it in 2 sentences and then move on, right?
Yeah. That's really good advice, Jess. I could hold myself up in that thing as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
And that speaks also to the question about, are we looking for a specific model of student, or the more interesting, the better? No. And then the second question, how do you manage your own bias? Well, we all have bias training before we look at any of these things and do a repeated course. And we also, in terms of specific model, I mean, every one of the applications is anonymized. We don't know either the sex or the name or the location, anything else. And in fact, everything becomes, the pronouns becomes they, them all the way through regardless. So we are sort of all the masking that takes place to try and prevent any bias that we might have, but then we're also aware of our own biases with this. And what we're really looking for is just experience, enthusiasm, and how well they fit to what these different streams are on the NERC. And the one other thing just on that is that I said something about the success rates. One thing to know is that success rates are never more than 20%, but rarely less than 10% in terms of the likelihood of any one student applying to this grant, whether they get an offer or not. And we make lots of offers that are not accepted, because a lot of times the students that we offer, I'll get lots of offers. And so sometimes we have to, when we shortlist, we don't just or when we start making offers, we don't just get down to like 8 or 9 or 10. We'll go much further than that, because when people are finding programs at the end, they say no to us, and then they go somewhere else, and then we can say yes to someone else, which is great, because we usually have a pretty, really good pool about that. And on that line, where did that go about? Oh, so one thing to know though, is that we make the same number of offers across the 3 different streams, but the biology stream usually has 2 to 3x more applications than the other 2 streams. So overall, it's a 10 to 20% acceptance rate. But if you're applying for the biology stream, there's a lot more competition, because there's a lot more students going for the BEEP line than there is for either the dynamic earth or the physical climate. So just have that in mind. It doesn't mean that you should immediately not become a biologist if that's what you want to be, but know that lots of other people are trying to do that too, and that our NERC remit says that we need to be funding all 3 of those equally, even though there are fewer applicants to 2 of the streams than the other one. But the overall 10 to 20%.
Yeah, maybe just to round off because a couple more questions have come in on the references and things and different experience, just to kind of round that off a bit, like as the others were saying earlier, we are definitely interested in all kinds of experience, and and people having done kind of different trajectories and so on. Some people have to leave university and go and work for a couple of years, and then they're able to apply for PhDs and things. Tell us about that, and tell us kind of what you've learned from that process, even if you've been working in something that hasn't been researched or anything. That will have developed you as a person, your maturity, your abilities, a lot of kind of different skills, working with people and so on. Tell us about all that, because that's all stuff that we care about.
There's a wide variety of skills and expertises on these panels as well. I mean, my own experiences. I mean, I started off working in a school bus garage repairing buses, so I did that for 10 years before going to university. So I think there's a wide sort of variety of experience, be read by lots of different people with lots of different experiences, personal and professional. So as Gregor said, they're all anonymized. We even ask referees to anonymize their reference letters. So we try and do things. We try and get the best students through the door, irrespective of background, experience, and so on and so forth. I think that's the key thing.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of questions, but if there's not a way to anonymize it, in that your referee is somebody that you also want to work with in a DTP, make sure you have several references, right? Somebody who has a vested interest and somebody who doesn't, right? Because obviously we'll take someone with vested interest, will take that conflict of interest into account, maybe take it a little bit less seriously. But the other thing to note is that when you think about references from work experience as well, a lot of people are really good at giving specific examples of, they took the initiative on this, they showed up at every time for such and such. So those sorts of things, right, they're true statements, right? We don't have to necessarily believe the referee or trust the referee's character, right? That's that sort of thing is fine.
Maybe we could talk a bit about interviews. I guess there've been a few questions here and there about the interviews as well. So it might be good to talk about what to expect there. I mean, I think we've said that interview panels are often quite kind of broad teams. I mean, there will be, there'll be an interview panel that's specific to each stream, right? So there'll be a physical climate stream. So if you're on that stream, it will be kind of climate people who are interviewing you. It'll be a fairly small panel, probably like about 4 people, probably including one person from outside the university. So one kind of external partner. I know one year I was on it, we had someone from the Met Office, just giving a bit of a view, kind of an industry view on things. But otherwise it'll be kind of, let's say 3 academics probably from different departments across that stream. Interviews, there aren't really traps, right? There's definitely like a stereotypical kind of Oxford interview thing where people are trying to trick you and kind of trip you up and stuff, and that's not that's really not what it's about, right? It's really an opportunity to kind of talk to you in a bit of depth and find out more about your motivation, your experience, your skills. There's a great saying that as an interviewer, you're not trying to tease the person. What you're trying to do is tease things out of them. So you're trying to get them to kind of talk about what they know, what they're excited about, and really kind of giving them the opportunity to kind of shine. And the aim really is to take everyone, right? If we given the money, we would take everyone, and right, and we really want to give everyone the opportunity to kind of show why it's them that we should be taking.
And it's also important to say that we ask all the students exactly the same questions in the same order, and everybody on the panel also has been through unconscious bias training. But we're not automatons. We have some questions that we want to ensure that get answered, and we give the everybody an opportunity to do so. But it is also a conversation. We allow the opportunity for follow-on questions and to get to know you a little bit better. And if we recognize that you're really nervous or you're struggling, we'll take a time out. We'll say, get a drink of water and come back and talk to us about it. We try and do it as a big warm hug where we're just trying to get to know you and learn about what motivates you and kind of draw the best out of you. And it is absolutely not of course there's nervousness because, we're using that as much as we're using the rest of your application to make a decision about whether you get an offer or not. But, so it matters, and that's why you're nervous, but it's not so nervous as to be debilitating. And it's certainly not a mean or nasty or kind of vindictive environment by any stretch. I mean, we do 2 full days where we just sit down and get to meet a lot of people who are really excited and interested about what they're doing. And that's a thrill for us. And so we certainly don't want to make it a negative experience for you or for us. And so it's all about just a lot of friendliness. There's a whole lot of questions. I don't know if we can get to every single one of them, but.
Well, there was one actually on the interviews. If you're invited to interview, at that point, is the outcome dependent solely on the interview performance?
No,
I think the answer to that is no. It's really, we view everything in the round. Every bit of information we can get is useful and is used. So it's just part of the story. Yeah, and actually, because the other thing is, it's so hard to tell how an interview went. Right, a lot of people will leave an interview thinking, "Oh, that was terrible. I really struggled in that. That's it." Whereas actually, the interviewers are thinking, "Wow, that was a really challenging interview. That really pushed us. That went so much further than all the others." It's don't be downhearted if at the end of an interview, if you think it went badly, it might have actually gone well. It's so hard to tell.
And absolutely, I mean, it's exactly as Tim was saying. It's one aspect. It's one pillar amongst a bunch of your entire application, and we then spend quite a bit of time on each panel, really thinking carefully about who are the people who we think are the ones who are going to be the ones who do best on the course, and that's never an easy decision. So, however you think you did. Is not.
And it's also best fit for the course, isn't it, Gregor? It's best fit for the course as well. It's not just
exactly. Yeah.
It's not just sort of smartest, cleverest, this, that, and the other. No, not at all. It's the best fit for the course. Who's going to get the most out of it?
Will there be a shortlist after interview? No. What we do, we shortlist for interview, and then we make decisions based upon all of the information that includes the interview. How many applicants are interviewed? I think it's last year, it's between 20 and 25.
Per stream.
Per stream. Exactly. So, and we do that over 2 full days, and they're all about the same length as well. In fact, they are, because we have to get on 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way through. So.
And there's no formal problem solving or technical aspect of the interview, but it's very likely that you're going to talk about science, right? So it'll be, why didn't this work? And another nice thing as an interviewer is that we get to learn things, right? So it'll be like, how does that work? And you should be able to explain it, right? So
it's not a test. That's the key thing.
That's absolutely right.
We're not going to ask you questions like solve this, do that. That's not a test. It's an interview. It's a chat.
There's a great question here about difference between projects you've announced on the DTC website and projects they've announced on the department websites. No, I mean, well, and the other thing to really emphasize here is that for what differentiates the Oxford NERC DTP from a lot of other DTPs up and down the country, and my favorite aspect of this is that we do not choose students based upon the projects. That has, I mean, you might have a project in mind, or you might have seen something advertised on a website, or already been speaking with someone about something that you might like to do. But we have lots of students that we accept on the course, and within the first 6 months, get their heads turned by something completely different or some other new idea, and then want to do something completely different. In fact, we don't really even let anybody start their projects until 6 months in, because we want it to be ground up and we want it coming from you. We never do the top-down style. Here's a series of 15 projects that must be done and everybody gets to choose one and that's it and that's what you're doing for your entire career. Absolutely not. And I know that lots of other NERC DTPs run their programs that way, and from that perspective, the kind of the students are the workhorses of the projects that the supervisors want to do. And instead, we bring the people onto the program that we feel are motivated to do what they want to do and are best able to be self-motivated to pursue something of their own interest. And so while there might be projects that are kind of around and you can use as a springboard for thinking about what you want to do, you're absolutely not beholden to doing those at all. In fact, we kind of prefer
that's
that
a huge advantage of this DTP. From my perspective as DGS, it gives you some time to come in to explore your thoughts, your interests, your motivations, and talk to prospective supervisors and see how that prospective supervisor, what their lab does, how they work, their management style, what they expect of their students, and how that fits in with your expectations. It's a hugely beneficial way of doing things. It really minimizes risk. You're not going in blind. You're going in open-eyed into a project the next 3.5 years, and you've kind of, you've minimized all the risks that come with doing a DPhil project.
But you don't have to design the project all by yourself, right? So
No,
we don't expect
definitely.
first-year grad students to be like, this, I know I'm going to do this, right? The difference between your abilities when you start and when you're a year or two in, it will be phenomenal. And so you'll develop your project and develop it as you go through.
And the other fun thing is that you'll be within a cohort. I mean, a cohort this year is over 20 students doing the most ridiculous range of projects, all that somehow fit within the NERC umbrella. But you talk to any two of them and they could be doing radically different things. And you are there with them as part of the teaching component of the first 6 months, but then it also is a very social thing. I mean, there's all kinds of opportunities just to hang out. People will be at different colleges and do different things, and often in very different departments, but there's a lot of coming together and then just sharing the experience of being on this course with people who are doing a wide range of different things. And that is, for me, another great aspect of this, because very often in other NERC DTPs, where you get told what the project is, you get sequestered into a very, one lab in one department, and that's it. You never speak to anybody else. Whereas we have a much more inclusive and large group around all of this, even amongst people who are doing things that you've never even heard of. And that's for me is a really exciting, because there's a lot of inspiration, a lot of motivation for precisely what John was talking about before, which is, exploring different ways to do things. And if that means going well outside of your comfort zone and finding people from completely different departments to pursue something, so be it, because it's your PhD and we're here to just support you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it gives you a huge latitude to go and learn new stuff and be exposed to new things, and I think that's important these days, so there'll be people doing computational machine learning projects, people doing volcanology, people doing risk awareness, ecology, this, that, and the other, and mixing it in gives everyone in those groups a good width of oversight of what goes on in other fields, and it's really useful for sort of picking up new skills.
And just how to do science. There's a million ways to skin a cat, and I think every single one of them is done as part of this NERC DTP.
Preferably not skinning cats in the DTP, though.
Maybe not so much. We do that in the interview program. Somebody asked about having a health condition that affects the interview performance. Absolutely, disclose it. Let us know. We're here to, again, we're not here to test. We're not here to get everybody to conform to what we want. If you need some extra time, can only do it a certain time of day, whatever, make us aware of all of that, and we will mitigate and accommodate as best we can. And also, if the interview is a conversation, how about are questions from the applicant during the interview? We encourage those. In fact, we reserve an entire portion toward the end of the interview when we say, what questions do you have for us? So think about those when you come in. And then that's part of it. There's things that you're unaware of, or you're confused about, or you just want to know more about, to ask us. Absolutely. This is not just, again, this is not top down. This is a conversation which is two ways. Yeah, and if we ask a question, you're like, wait, what do you mean by that? We'll answer. We're not just gonna sit there and wait for you to struggle. Absolutely not.
There's one other question about department scholarships. So is the interview the same for the department scholarship or for a different one? I guess people there's a few different options here. So sometimes the DTP might kind of refer your application. I can see John is the expert here. I'm going to defer to him, but sometimes the DTP might kind of think actually this application should go to this department, and then in that case you might get a specific interview from them. And then that would feed into their scholarship process. Other times, kind of information from the from our application is enough, and that's forwarded onto the departments. So there are a few different options there. I think is that fair to say, John?
Yeah, so I'm very, very keen for obvious reasons in getting as many people through the door as possible. So maximising how we treat scholarships, how we sort of use DTP and maximising the number of people that we can take onto a DTP or a DPhil in Oxford is a big thing. So we have a few. We don't, in my view, we don't have enough. I'd like more. I'd like alumni to give us more money so we can have more scholarships. But there are a few. So there's the Clarendon, which is run out of Univ College, which is anyone who scores very well in the DTP interviews. I think the Clarendon has one for DTP and one for department. And the nice thing is we can they can be for domestic students or overseas students, and that obviously then frees up another place for DTP. There are various others which we look at, and as I say, we are quite keen on coming up with creative ways of how to spend this money or how to spend these scholarships. So I'm actively pursuing other scholarships in other places and colleges at the moment, industry funding, and try and maximise this. So this is actually where if you get a letter that says you're on the reserve list, and I don't know how the letters from the DTP read, the ones from departments tend to be a bit confusing. But we do have like a reserve list, and it is really, really useful to have that reserve list because we'll often find that we make an offer fully funded, and that person will drop out for other reasons. It might be they've got a place in the US or another college, or they've just decided they don't want to do it, so they will drop out. So that reserve list is very, very useful, especially when we can then we sort the scholarships out post decisions for everything else. The timescales of this is often a bit later in the term. So we can then offer a scholarship to somebody that might be on the DTP, and that would free up a DTP place or something like that. But in reality, I'm just very keen on sort of maximising how many people we can take onto DPhils at Oxford.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of moving parts there. This question is fun. How many? Is it a disadvantage if you don't have any publications? Not even a little bit. The vast majority of people who apply do not have publications. If you do, then that's great. Tell us about those. Make sure you highlight those and put them right up front and tell us what. But if you were middle author on a 100 author paper and you were just made an author because somebody was being kind and you actually didn't contribute to the study, we know that. I mean, we're all experienced this and practice of this. So just having a paper isn't such a huge deal if your involvement wasn't that great. But if you've got a paper that you were heavily involved with, absolutely, that's great research experience. Tell us about that. On the other extreme of that, we had within the last couple of years, we had someone apply who had like 50 publications and they didn't get an offer, right? So it doesn't guarantee you. Having a paper doesn't guarantee you, nor does not having one eliminate you. So just tell us about your research experience and don't worry too much about how you think we are ranking your things.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Well, there's one kind of slightly different question that might have been touched on maybe in the previous session. I'm not sure. What impact will the supervision team of the project have on the admission? So the short answer is very little, to be honest. I mean, we have this system where there's a broad set of reviewers, and then the interview panel is a broad set of people who aren't the supervisors. So I won't say that it has no impact. I think supervisors are obviously asked their opinion, but that comes in at a really late stage. Like if there's a real tie, I think if the kind of independent panel and the different kind of reviewers have come to a real tie, then at that kind of point, if there's clear supervisor preferences, then we do have to consider those. But the main aim is definitely to you're not out to convince one supervisor that you're the right person. You need to convince this broad panel that you're the right person.
Any more questions? I can't actually see the questions. I'm having to use my phone.
All right.
My laptop's backed up. Sorry.
Can we apply for other Oxford scholarships along with the DPT? Absolutely. That's one thing about Oxford is that there's tons of different things around, and have a look. And a lot of them will be catered very specifically to colleges or to a background or to a specific relationship with the funding. But I mean, it's madness. Each year for my own students, I just say, have a look around, see what you might personally be eligible for. Because I had a student one year, there was something called the Hong Kong Jockey Club, which only gave scholarships to people who had, or either born or raised or had people or relatives in Hong Kong. And that wasn't true of most of my lab, but he was a master's student and he applied for that, right? And so so the NERC DTP is a very specific, very impressive line of money that we get from NERC, but there are within departments and within divisions and university writ large, there are many more things available, and why not apply for as many that you can possibly find and are eligible for?
Mhm.
Does it help our application if we've secured external funding? Yeah, money talks. And that's just not true of this NERC DTP, but of life in general. If you've got funding already and you're bringing that to the table, absolutely. Let us know that. And it may very well be because it's the money isn't, we don't just have money for one student. We get a large, exactly as John was saying, and because if some students are international or some students have other forms of cash, or sometimes we can link up with other programs to create positions where they're funded partly by this and partly by that. So if there is money, if you have secured money from something else, especially if it's like an industry thing or anything else, yeah, let us know that right away. I mean, that's a great, it's never a bad, more money is never a bad thing.
Please do email your DGS or the prospective DGS at the department, or the graduate officer at the department you're thinking of. Tell them that you may have the potential to make this scholarship. There might be, I know for certain countries around the world, Indonesia, China, and whatever, there might be time limits on when you can apply. So if that time limit doesn't quite align with us, do tell us, and we'll try and sort of figure out how to best make this happen. But it's especially important for overseas students, because the pot of money we have from DTP or from the research councils for overseas students is relatively small. So if we can find a part-funded scholarship, or there is a scholarship like Hong Kong Jockey Club's a very good one actually. They give a lot of scholarships to Oxford. So if there's something like that, do tell your prospective department that you're thinking you may have the potential to do that. And tell us early, and we'll try and make sure as best we can that we've got all the paperwork lined up so that allows you to make that application.
That said, in the past, I've never seen us move people in the DTP ranking because of funding, right? So the DTP money is allocated based on merit. Yeah. And then if there's the potential to create further scholarships, then that can be incorporated with any money that you've gotten from externally. And if you bring extra, then we'll get more students essentially, right?
Exactly it. Yeah, it doesn't change the ranking. It just allows us to sort of expand the student numbers. Yeah.
Sorry, just lurking in the background. Can I clarify one point? We don't self-fund students.
You don't know, but direct entry could. Yeah. So that's.
No, we don't self-fund. We don't do self-funded students. You can, if you've got a scholarship that you can secure and bring with you, great. But we do not allow students to fund out of their own personal funds.
No, but for direct entry,
important distinction, because that would introduce unfairness in the process.
No, that's right. So for direct entry straight into department projects, then some departments do allow self-funded, but not on the DTP. Then that's a clear distinction. Yeah. What's next?
There was one question about kind of different experiences. I can't find the question now, but someone essentially saying, all my experiences I think it was like in astrophysics, and yet now I want to apply to do something different. How much of a problem is that? It's totally not a problem. The skill with this thing is always to, again, communicating to that broad panel. What did you learn from your projects in that other area? What skills did it give you, and how has that prepared you to kind of apply it to a new area for you?
There's a whole bunch of questions that from the beginning, actually, that people are, and I think rightly, a bit confused about reference letters versus supervisors, and to what degree should they request letters from people who are their who are maybe already supervising a master's project or an undergraduate who they would like to continue working with on the NERC DTP, should they, if they're going to name them as a potential supervisor, can they also use them for a letter of reference?
I would say yes, but not the only letter of reference.
Exactly.
Right? If they know you best, then yeah, they should write something. But hopefully they're going to be very specific. And that shouldn't be the only person giving you information. Did we answer the questions about anonymization and should you not disclose information about your background in
Oh, I don't think we did.
personal statements?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a question, oh, well, you know, I've had this past experience, maybe it was because of my ethnicity. Does that mean that I shouldn't write about that in my personal statement because the application is supposed to be anonymous? And I would say no, if there's something that you think specifically affected you, and that you had to overcome that, or even if you're just working towards a group and you think it's going to be obvious that you're a woman because you've been in this women's club and you're trying to you can include that, right? If it's decided that's part of your experience, that's part of your application, and that's in addition to kind of your general life experience.
Could I just make the point as well, though, that there's the contextual statement. So that kind of stuff can be put in the contextual statement, and then that frees up some words in the personal statement. So you can talk a bit more. So you can kind of have extra words to talk about that type of stuff in the contextual statement as well, if you want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of the questions on kind of anonymized references and things. I mean, it's, you know, that I mean, it helps us if people who are writing references, you know, take that on board, but that's not something for you to stress about, right? I mean, we have a system of, that will kind of go through applications in general and kind of redact things that I thought to be kind of giving away too much information in a sense. So yeah, please don't let that be a big stress for the application. That's you know, thanks for helping, but that's kind of our problem, I guess.
Yeah.
More than your problem particularly.
So I'm conscious as well that we've reached 12. The time's flown by. Would you like to just do one more question before we break for lunch? I think this is quite an important one. I can see Greg is typing an answer about skills. So I think that's quite a key thing. So perhaps you could talk.
What's the question? I can't see the question.
A bit about that. Oh, it's just gone into the answered pile. Let's see. What type of skills should we highlight in the statement? Is it better to prioritize discussing relevant tangible research skills or non-tangible skills like perseverance, intellectual curiosity?
So for me, the biggest thing in writing is, and in film and in any sort of thing where you're making an argument, is you can say things, you can tell as much as you want, but far more impressive and far more compelling, and what's really going to grab someone is when you show it. And this is true, like that's why Marvel films are in trouble right now, because of so much exposition where everything has to be explained, right? But if you say I have shown a great deal of perseverance in my career, great, you're telling us that, but now show us that, right? And the whole dichotomy between research skills and non-tangible skills, that's a false dichotomy. They all bleed into each other, but show us, tell us, like and here's a case study where I was doing something and I met with a whole series of people and they all said I couldn't do it. And then I realized if I did this, and then I just ended up doing it. And I just kept going, but show us that. Don't just tell us that. That's for me is the biggest thing. And that's then becomes about a narrative about who you are through a demonstrated case study. And that's far more, rooted in reality that we can then go, I can see what you mean by that. Rather, everybody's going to say that they, persevere. Well, sure. Who doesn't, right? But show us how you do that. And now we're talking.
Evidence statements.
There you go. Evidence-based.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a fantastic place to finish this session, unless anyone's desperate to butt in at that point. But if not, then I'd like to say a huge thank you to our assessors for such an enlightening and informative hour. I can't believe that was a whole hour.